Welcome back. We're picking up right where we left off, diving straight into the next chapter of World War II. Let's continue and see how the events unfold. Emperor Hirohito had previously taken certain military measures and decided to activate them. The first of these measures was an attack on the Pearl Harbor naval base on Oahu Island. The main objective of the Pearl Harbor attack was to neutralize the entire U.S. naval force in the Pacific. Replacing the destroyed fleet would take a year, during which the Japanese could continue their invasions freely. The Japanese naval force was commanded by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The fleet, departing quietly from the Japanese mainland for the attack, consisted of 6 aircraft carriers, 2 destroyers, 3 cruisers, 23 submarines, and 441 warplanes. On the American side, some signs of the approaching attack on Hawaii were known. However, no preparations had been made. When the attack occurred, anti-aircraft guns were unmanned, ammunition was locked away, and anti-submarine nets were not deployed. Even the patrolling fighter planes were not flying. On the morning of the attack, the radar station, which had not officially entered service and had been in testing for a long time, was positioned at the northern tip of Oahu. The radar detected the Japanese planes, but the inexperienced new officer dismissed the warning as insignificant. Even though the operators reported receiving the largest signal they had ever seen, the observation officer hesitated and thought the radar was detecting American B-17 heavy bombers approaching from above. This was the greatest mistake made by the Americans. At 7:19 on December 7, 1941, 353 Japanese planes took off from aircraft carriers, flying in 2 columns toward Oahu. At 7:55, the planes reached the island and began the attack by dropping the first 50-kilogram bomb from above. American warships, positioned very close to each other, became targets for bombs dropped by Japanese planes one after another. After approximately 90 minutes, a second wave bombarded the naval base again. Unable to respond, the American forces could only hide helplessly. By the end of the attack, 2,403 Americans were killed and 1,178 were injured. 18 ships, including 5 battleships, were sunk. 188 aircraft were destroyed and 155 aircraft were seriously damaged. On the Japanese side, 29 aircraft were lost, and 55 aviators and 9 submarine personnel were killed. However, Japan did not achieve everything it wanted. The 3 aircraft carriers essential to the Pacific Fleet's striking power, as well as key fuel tankers, submarines, and factory ships, were not in the port and thus avoided damage. The day after the attack, the United States and Japan declared war on each other. Continuing their offensive, the Japanese launched a landing on the eastern coasts of the Malaya Peninsula on December 8, 1941, the day after the Pearl Harbor raid. From the very first days of the war, the Japanese Air Force destroyed British air fleets. Allied forces, consisting of Indian, British, Malay, Dutch, and Australian soldiers, unable to receive air support and surprised by the sudden Japanese attacks, began retreating south along the peninsula. The Japanese army, with infantry supported by light tanks and equipped with bicycles for rapid movement, continued advancing south rapidly. On January 11, 1942, the Japanese captured Kuala Lumpur and continued their advance. On January 27, the remaining Allied forces were ordered to retreat from the Malaya Peninsula to Singapore. The Japanese began their attack on Singapore on February 7, 1942, and captured the city within a week. The war ended on February 15, 1942, with the surrender of the remaining Allied forces. This battle resulted in the largest number of British troops surrendering in history. According to Japanese reports, 62,000 soldiers were taken prisoner on the island. With their advance continuing southward, the Japanese faced no remaining forces to prevent them from capturing Indonesia and Borneo. The Japanese army quickly captured these territories as well, posing a threat to Australia. By the end of April 1942, the Japanese were preparing to control the Coral Sea between Australia and New Caledonia by establishing air bases at Port Moresby in southeastern New Guinea and Tulagi in the southern Solomon Islands. Upon learning of this Japanese plan, the Allies put all available air and naval forces on alert. When the Japanese landed on Tulagi on May 3rd, American aircraft launched from an American aircraft carrier attacked the Japanese landing group, sinking a destroyer and a landing ship. The aircraft carriers of both sides spent May 5th to 6th searching for each other. On the morning of May 7th, planes launched from a Japanese aircraft carrier sank an American destroyer and a tanker. The next day, Japanese planes sank the American aircraft carrier Lexington and heavily damaged the Yorktown. In response, American aircraft heavily damaged the large Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku to the point that it could no longer fight. Having lost a significant number of planes, the Japanese were forced to retreat under attacks from American aircraft. After the defeat and regretting their failure to destroy the American aircraft carriers at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese decided to complete the unfinished mission at Midway. The Japanese fleet assembled for this purpose included 4 aircraft carriers and 11 battleships. In contrast, the Americans had prepared a fleet of 76 units around 3 aircraft carriers. However, the Japanese made a critical mistake by splitting their fleet in two. 2 aircraft carriers moved north while 2 moved south. The Americans, having broken Japanese codes, were already aware of this and prepared accordingly. Despite losing the USS Yorktown aircraft carrier, the American fleet managed to sink the 4 most important Japanese aircraft carriers, the backbone of the Japanese Imperial Fleet. The most important factors in this American victory were breaking the Japanese encryption systems and the lack of radar on Japanese ships. From this point onward, the Japanese would lose naval superiority and shift to a defensive position. The American forces began operations on Pacific Islands, advancing toward the Solomon Islands. With increased personnel and material resources, by the end of 1943, the United States began an offensive policy in the Central Pacific. The Gilbert and Makin Islands were recaptured from the Japanese during these raids. Following these victories, the U.S. Navy turned its attention to Guadalcanal. Since Guadalcanal was known as the location of Japan's third main defensive line, a very difficult battle was anticipated. In early July, the Japanese began constructing an airstrip on Guadalcanal in the southern Solomon Islands. And that's where we'll leave it for now. The battles, strategies, and turning points of World War II shaped the course of history forever. Thanks for watching, and be sure to stay tuned for more chapters as we continue exploring this epic story.